Hello and welcome to On the Same Page, a new series of intergenerational conversations by Changing the Narrative Colorado. I'm your host, Dominic Gazzuti. Thank you so much for joining us. I am joined by a wonderfully diverse panel of people to discuss how our current events might affect how we think about and use technology in the future. Allow me to introduce our esteemed panel. First up, Katrina Chafin, Program Manager at Prime Health. John Emerson, a health technology leader and founder and president of Flying Cloud Health. Amanda Gonzalez, Executive Director at Colorado Common Cause. Janet Lopez, Director of Policy and Advocacy for the Rose Community Foundation. Ben Moultrie, Board Chair at NextFifty Initiative. Stella Nash, a member of the Professional Advisory Council at Senior Planet Colorado. James Roy II, Executive Director at Park Hill Collective Impact. Shreyas Sriram, Vice President at Generation Tech. And Amy Zavala, Lifestyle Coordinator at Vita Littleton. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate having you all on this panel. In the last few months, Zoom has really become a verb, highlighting the increased importance that technology is playing in all of our lives. What changes have you seen, either personally or that has affected the work that you do with the communities that you work with? Katrina, we're going to start with you.
I think now more than ever, we've relied heavily on technology to help us connect with others, both personally and professionally. And I would say in my life, I've been fortunate to work for an organization that had already implemented remote work days. And I'm a professor at a university that's been offering online classes for over 20 years. But where I've really seen the change happen with technology is in the healthcare sector, particularly. Not only have we been able to leverage technology to help people connect, but we've also been able to use it to advance healthcare accessibility. Telehealth has been a necessity for most organizations to continue to care for patients over the past few months, and we've seen a drastic increase in telehealth utilization. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And speaking of health, John, let's go to you. How have you seen just really the last just couple of months change what you do when it comes to things like having Zoom, whether it's on WebEx or Cisco or anything, or Cisco WebEx or Skype or anything else? Everyone's calling it Zoom, or just using that technology. How has it changed what you're doing?
Well, COVID has changed everything. I mean, it's been a paradigm shift, really. I mean, personally, I have two kids at home who are 7 and 11 years old, and so I am both doing the same work I've always done tied to healthcare and technology, which has exploded, as Katrina said so well. And then my kids are doing online learning and gaming, and I'm trying to manage them. And at the same time, while I was having a lot of remote conversations, the fact that everything is now video has exploded. But at the same time, I do think that looking at how everyone accesses healthcare and the fact that there are people who still love to use the phone and people who really love live video, and trying to think about how you design systems for everyone has really been, I think, the next challenge, because funding has allowed a lot of online access. And the question is, how do we make sure people provide it and people still access it?
Amanda, this has really affected every industry, but you have a unique perspective with how you work with communities with Colorado Common Cause. Tell us how these last couple of months have changed what you do.
At Common Cause, we know that our democracy is stronger when everyone participates. And so it's our goal that everyone pay attention to government, know what's going on, vote, fill out their census. And I think that we've seen that be both more and less effective over the last few months. In some ways, we've seen government, in particular local government, really kind of struggle to adapt quickly to online environments. But I think we've also seen a unique opportunity for more people to participate, right? If you were somebody who lived in Durango, maybe you had a hard time knowing what was going on in Denver at our state government. Or maybe if you're somebody that it's harder for you to leave your home, but now you can attend a city council meeting via your phone. So I think we've both seen rapid change and some really great ways for people to participate in new ways.
Well, Janet, as a director of policy and advocacy, I got to believe that your job has changed quite a bit and just how that works and how people are doing things nowadays. Tell us about the changes and how it's affected what you do.
Yeah, so I work at a community foundation, and most of our work is around doing grant making that's really focused on Metro Denver and how do we really strengthen Metro Denver. And in terms of our work in community, what we're trying to do in this moment is to try to mitigate sort of really the impact of the pandemic at this moment. And so, fresh on my mind, we just finished our second round of sort of applications around COVID mitigation. And I would share in terms of the role of technology that, we're really trying to figure out organizations that are reaching folks that are the furthest from opportunities. And I will tell you that overwhelmingly, we had hundreds of applications that came in, and overwhelmingly, the request was around sort of virtual service delivery and trying to sort of innovate around technology to be able to try to reach people. And that really varied across the continuum from, we've heard people mention already sort of like the advances in telehealth, which is really amazing, to community partners that are trying to take their summer programs and their in-school programs online, to sort of to what Amanda mentioned in terms of city and county governments trying to run now and take services. We had a request for trying to take building permits online. And I think there's both sort of a technology piece there. And I think we're also seeing really requests about how do people access technology and use it. And also in terms of the diversity of the state, translation services and making sure that that in terms of what's happening with technology, that's also being translated into multiple languages. So huge need right now that we're seeing in our grant making.
That certainly makes sense to me. Ben, you're with NextFifty Initiative. What kind of changes in going to Zoom calls and everything else related? How is that changing work for your group?
Thank you. Actually, there are a number of aspects of actually how we work. Obviously, much more virtual these days, but very much like the Rose Community Foundation, we've had a pivot here a little bit in terms of how we work actually with the organizations that we fund. Our focus basically on responding to the COVID crisis that we're currently seeing, but more importantly, the shift towards normalizing technology in our everyday lives has, in many ways, validated our organization's focus on leveraging innovation in general to achieve our mission.
Well, I think as we look to you, Stella, and the work that you're doing as an advisory, part of the Professional Advisory Council, how does that change in this kind of environment? I can clearly imagine that the meetings would change, but maybe also how it advises, how it works. Tell us about how this has changed what you do in the organization's Senior Planet.
Sure. There's been many challenges as well as opportunities. And with Senior Planet, there's been an opportunity to reach far more people than those coming directly to the center. Virtually, there are more people on Zoom, and since March, there's been an increase of 51% of new users. I found that there is an awareness and a need for digital literacy, and more people are using Zoom. They learn how to use it, and they are more comfortable with it. They're going to churches, they're doing meetings, book clubs, and family reunions, connections, and things like that.
Well, speaking of connections, James, let's go to you. I think your organization with Park Hill Collective Impact is if I'm not mistaken, bringing a lot of intergenerational conversations together. And I got to believe something like the technology we're all getting used to nowadays might be helping with that, maybe not. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I'd say, technology is definitely helping out in a lot of ways. Obviously, if we didn't have it, we wouldn't be able to hold our meetings. One of the things that I've really noticed is that there's some challenges in outreach, really getting people to really buy in and join in on some of these meetings. The community leaders that have been involved in these meetings have been folks that have been looking to help and understand. Our meetings have, what I've generally tried to do is get people that want to tell their story and need something from the community, from the partners in our community, to change the dynamics. One of the funny things, though, that I'd say that has really changed is I've really noticed a brand preference amongst everyone. So if you're using a different brand, say Zoom or Google Meet, or I think there's Blue Jeans now, there's a bunch of different ones. And, I've seen some gripes with the choice of brand. Zoom seems to be, of course, the most popular one and the most accepted one. But I think that's been a funny kind of challenge for us as well. The other last piece that I'll talk about is we've had to change the way that we facilitate just a bit. When we meet in person, there is an aspect where you can, have an informal start where people can sit down and chat with each other and catch up. Right now, it's hard to do that online. So what I try to do is really informally start every meeting that we have online. It'll give people a chance to talk about what's going on, express their feelings. It's a frustrating time, obviously, with the pandemic and the social issues that we have going on, the murder of George Floyd, and everything that's going on in the country. So being able to give people a chance to really let go of some of those emotions, catch up, and formally start things has changed. Is something that I've noticed I had to change in our meetings to get a comfortable level before we dive right into the work.
James, I'm so glad you mentioned that, both about the brand preference and that informal part. I have found myself missing that same thing. There is more productivity in kind of that informal chat than it was easy to take that for granted. And doing it online, it's hard to replace because you feel, well, we have a meeting at 2:00 and we started this, so let's start the meeting. Here's the agenda. Where I know in person we might be informal for a while. And that has been a difficult transition. So excellent point bringing that up. Shreyas, let's go to you. What's been the biggest changes or the ramifications that you've seen of people adopting this kind of technology currently that you've seen over the last couple of months for what you do?
Thank you, Dominic. So yeah, we here at Generation Tech, we're committed. We're a youth volunteer organization committed to bridging the generational gap between the younger and older generations. And we did this through technology assistance. And before we had to, we were offering in-person technology help. And obviously that's completely had to change. We've really had to resort to using online platforms. So recently, to offer our services, we conducted a webinar to our audience. So even within that webinar where we answered a lot of these the older generation questions about technology, we've noticed that a lot of those questions have now changed. In previous surveys, before the pandemic, we've noticed a lot of questions about, for example, how to get your GPS in your car working, or printer issues. But now we've completely seen a different focus. Questions oriented now towards online grocery shopping, online doctor's appointments. So this unprecedented time has really shifted the focus of technology, and we've also seen a lot of the older generations that may not have been into technology as much beforehand now feel prompted to really enter and begin exploring a lot of the new technologies.
Well, Amy, as we look to you, I got to believe with a lot of lifestyles changing, as a lifestyle coordinator, you're seeing a lot of these changes in what you do. Tell us more about that.
Absolutely, Dominic. Yeah, I've had front row seat to this change. In fact, I've had access to implement change as well. As a community, I've witnessed kind of like a bell curve of embracing the technology. I would say the biggest thing is the fear of COVID and the loneliness, isolation, and lack of like contact has outweighed that complicated technology that we might think older people have in their heads. One of the things that we did here at Vita Littleton was that I implemented a virtual contest, encouraging everyone to just participate on Zoom one time. And we started that on March 17th. So that was immediately after kind of the shutdown happened. And I know that, data doesn't lie. Those numbers don't lie. So I started tracking everything. And I'm happy to say when we ended our little challenge, our virtual challenge, at the end of May right here, we had 60.1% of residents who participated one time or more. So when Stella shared her stats about, 51% of people have embraced technology, I wasn't surprised because I saw that here. So that fear of COVID and loneliness definitely outweighed the complications of technology.
Well, I think these are great answers. Let me get to our next question. We'll go around the horn for everybody again, but to some particular areas. It's been said that the pandemic has exposed some systemic inequities and fault lines in our society. When we think about that in terms of digital divides, of who has access and who doesn't, what have you seen? Ben, I want to start with you, especially as we look at maybe the rural and urban infrastructure across the state. There's clearly a divide there that I know state government's been working on, but it's not as if it's fixed. When you look at systemic inequities, what does it mean to you, Ben?
In terms of infrastructure, it's long been the case that we've seen kind of the much more robust digital infrastructures within urban areas. That is undergoing change. Colorado, in fact, is one of the leading states for deploying broadband in rural areas. We have underway, there are a lot of technological innovations going underway to bring broadband to the masses. This actually is critical. As we've just discussed here, the growth in the use of Zoom. Video technologies have been around literally for decades. We have smartphones, we have video call apps on our phone, but now we're starting to see the value proposition. And the pandemic has highlighted the importance of digital technologies and access to continuity, economically, socially, in multiple ways. And so what I think we're going to see now is really an acceleration of the adoption of technologies as really being very vital to multiple aspects of our lives. The greatest challenge will not be technology per se, but it will be affordability. And so that's really where you see the real challenge in terms of digital divide.
Katrina, let's go to you next. I mean, you talked about telehealth before, and that seems both as an opportunity in my eyes, but also with the differences, the inequities, as we're talking about with this question around the state of Colorado. I got to believe that people in Hawley might have an entirely different broadband situation than I might have in Highlands Ranch versus what they have in Glenwood Springs. What are you seeing when it comes to these kind of systemic inequities, and what are your thoughts?
Thanks, Dominic. So I really just want to echo what Ben had said. And when we're talking about telehealth, at the root of that all, the systemic inequity there is the broadband access. Because when we're talking about a whole entire state or region, it's not everyone that has the same access to broadband bandwidth and speed and all of the components that they need to actually be able to access those technologies, whether it's telehealth through live video or being able to even have a phone call and a phone conversation. So I think that's really the underlying thread when it comes to telehealth and the inequity there.
Well, John, let's stay on the health idea with your expertise. What are you seeing either of ways to address the digital divide or just the impact of that digital divide as now we're into an entirely different era in what you're doing?
I want to start by saying the number of digital visits across the board has been night and day, right? If you look at primary care, maybe 1% was happening in February, and now it's sort of like 88% of all primary care visits are now happening through something that's called telehealth. And so there's been a breakthrough. That said, there really are challenges to access, especially if you look at, those in rural areas, those poor who maybe lost their job and can't afford their data plan, or in older adults. But I think a really interesting thing in the older adults that I just want to talk about is that the fact that providers are now paid for telehealth visits and with much more flexibility has created a lot of opportunity because a doctor can provide a visit via phone and get paid that same amount as doing a live video. And then there are things completely different, such as there's even a semi-virtual visit. So let's say if you need a COVID test, you can get evaluated online and now do a drive up where just one little piece of the visit, the test, is something that you can do in person. And so I think that the flexibility and payment opportunities are creating a lot of ways to bridge the divide and keep people safe.
Well, health is a major issue, but Janet, I know education is as well, especially remote learning. And I have family on every side of this issue. I have family who are teachers. I have family with older students in high school trying to keep everyone focused there. I have family with little ones. They're all facing different aspects of this issue. And then you add the whole digital divide when it comes to all the students and families across Colorado. There's a lot of issues to break down. What are your thoughts, Janet?
Yeah. I think absolutely, it sort of the speed in which different schools and different school districts were able to sort of switch to remote learning was incredibly varied in terms of sort of the inequity issues. And there really are, so in April, the Colorado Department of Ed and the Colorado Education Initiative were able to do really good sort of survey gathering, and in April, and so these numbers have changed, but I think that they're still somewhat accurate. But it showed that sort of statewide, and they were able to survey almost 90% of districts, that there were still 53,000 students that needed Wi-Fi enabled devices, and almost 65,000 students that needed internet access at home. And so I think that, echoing what I heard from others in terms of, I do think it is an affordability issue for some families. And then for some, it's really a broadband access issue in terms of connectivity in rural areas in particular. And it really does, it touches, any household that has children in it, or folks that employ folks who are working and trying to figure out how to balance the remote learning that's going on in their homes. I would tell you that sort of in terms of the needs in school districts, on top of sort of the very basics of technology, we also saw that the top needs for districts were, social emotional support for their students, and trying to think about what are the innovations to be able to give that support through a remote learning experience. And then technical support for online learning for teachers is a huge need that we quickly had to adapt to. And I would just share with you, we did a lot of grant making sort of in the first couple months that was really emergency and basic need. And there really were only two main things that schools started with that they needed the most. sort of food for their families and for their students, and also, technology needs. And you really are seeing a really significant digital divide. We had one school district who, was 2,000 devices short of being able to provide a device for every household, not even every child, but just every household. So you think about needing to be able to actually have a computer for every child is pretty important. And they had a gap to be able to have just a computer in a household. And then you have on the other side, districts that typically have more wealth that were able to lend out they had enough devices to lend out within their building to every family that had need. So you really were seeing, I think, huge equity issues in terms of learning around speed of which districts were able to flip to remote learning, and also sort of just ongoing needs for families being served in those districts.
Well, we've looked at the major issues of education and healthcare, of how the digital divide is showing itself in those areas. Let's talk about community. James, with your work, the digital divide can exist with our neighbors in Yuma, and it can exist in our neighbors just down the street. It really doesn't need to. That's the great thing. Well, I guess not the great thing, but it's the one part of this that is equal for everybody. It can affect folks regardless of distance. How are you seeing the digital divide play out in your work with the community?
Yeah, Dominic. I think when it comes to talking community, everything that everyone has said before me on this really fits in exactly what we're talking about. What Janet was just talking about with the education situation, it applies directly to the families in the community. Now, one of the things, though, that I would say, if I were going to relate it to engagement and really getting in touch with the community, I've seen a kind of a divide on the access to reliable technology and reliable internet. So when you have those issues going on and really trying to connect community digitally, those are things that really need to be strong and available. Now, on the other side of things, I would say that due to the access to smartphones, to cheap smartphones these days, and that apps are available on a lot of those phones, whether you're using Zoom or one of the other brands, it is very accessible from a smartphone. Now, from the engagement standpoint. Now, of course, you're not going to be able to do schoolwork on a cell phone. So having that reliable technology, the more substantial technology, is something that is of course needed in the community. But as far as being able to reach people and and be able to have that technology work for you in that sense of things, it's pretty available, and that's been pretty helpful to us reaching out to the community.
Amanda, I know that when we look at another big issue when it comes to the digital divide is how people are able to participate, whether it be everything from the census or just civic engagement. That usually, regardless of how much money you have or where you live, you can always go to your local city hall, the city council meeting, and say something in person. That isn't always the case now. You have a whole different situation. That might change the way we can participate in civic engagement. How has this affected your work, and what are you seeing as a digital divide issue with Colorado Common Cause?
Yeah, it's also changing the way that we are interacting with each other and encouraging each other to be engaged. I think whether it's concern about the response to COVID or the call for racial justice and to value Black lives, I think what's evident is that our voices are maybe more important than ever. And we have three big opportunities this year where everyone needs to be heard. Thankfully, in Colorado, we're better set up than most states. Common Cause and our allies have been working on these issues for decades. And so those three key places where we really need everyone's voice this year are the primary election, which is happening on June 30th. because I think a number of folks may be hesitant to vote in person. It's really important that everyone's address is updated so that your mail ballot gets to you at the correct place. If voters need to do that, they can do that at govotecolorado.gov and just make sure that they're registered to vote and that their ballot is going to come to them and they don't have to go in person if they don't want to. Of course, the census is happening now. And luckily, that was already set up to be done online. And so people can still go to my2020census.gov. Enumerators will be coming around later this year. And it's pretty important to everybody's health that people do that, from their home computer or their tablet or their phone if they can, because nobody wants somebody knocking on their door right now. And then, of course, we've got the November election coming up, and I think everything feels a little unknown right now. And so we're seeing the increased importance of talking to your neighbors, via Zoom, via Facebook, via phone about, hey, there's some important issues happening right now, and we all need to weigh in and participate. And that definitely hasn't changed with our changing environment.
Well, Stella, let me get to you about how you're working with the people in your community at Senior Planet. How is this digital divide coming up as a conversation with your group?
First of all, I'd like to say that this pandemic has lifted the veil on the inequities that people tend to see. And the voice of those that are speaking are mostly toward the youth, because as the person mentioned about the schools and giving out computers and everything, well, one thing that's missing is the fact that they may have these computers and tablets, but not access to internet, so they have to find a location for Wi-Fi. But nowhere in the conversation have I heard anybody mention giving tablets and computers to the elderly. All I hear is the fact that we are more likely to get the virus. We need to stay at home and isolate. I've seen the economic barriers because it prevents people from getting and having access to affordable technology and devices. So one of the things that I think is that with Senior Planet, not only do they do things virtually, but they can call in by phone to help alleviate. So when things and topics are going on every day that are by Zoom, you can call in and hear the same thing.
Still, I think you bring up an amazing point. It's important to know that the needs really cross generations, and this is what all these conversations are about. And I think that's some really important input. Shreyas, I want to go to you because you actually helped tie together some of maybe some of this divide. That issue is kind of what you do to address. Tell us more about that and what you're doing about it.
Definitely. So we've really focused on the generational divide between the youth and the older generations. And what we've definitely noticed is that when it comes to the rapidly changing world of technology, youth who are generally very well integrated into social media and online platforms have generally not had a very large learning curve amidst this pandemic in terms of adjusting to new technology. So we at Generation Tech have really noticed that digital divide that between the two generations in terms of the learning curve. So, and it's especially important now more than ever because in terms of inequity, now not only is the internet being used just for communication with family and friends, it's really being used as an important platform for healthcare, for essential food and So from that regard, it's especially important that we're working to minimize that divide, that digital divide between the two generations.
It's a great point. Amy, I want to get a little bit deeper on this with you because I think you have a unique perspective with the work you're doing and talking about there's a digital divide that I think that is clear across generations, across economic levels. But there's also a personality part of this, introverts and extroverts, and the idea of a video camera in your house. It's one thing to voluntarily show up to a meeting face to face, but another thing to turn on a camera for your house or participating that way via a phone or via a webcam. There's a lot of work there that gets into this digital divide conversation. Tell us about how you're delving into that with what you do.
Thank you, Dominic. Yes, I've seen the residents here at Vida. It's an active luxury living apartment community. So they have access to lots of different things. What I've seen is it comes down to that personal preference. And like you said, the introverts versus the extroverts. If you're an extrovert, specifically an older resident here, Beth, she has a small smartphone, but she is an extrovert. And where there's a will, there's a way. She got onto Zoom and participates regularly in our Tai Chi and other fitness classes over her cell phone in her apartment. It's beautiful. And I've spoken to other residents here who are more, shy on the introverted edge. And they're content continuing doing the things that they have been doing, which means not engaging on Zoom and connecting that way. So I've seen both ends of the spectrum, which is really exciting. It's also nice to know that they have an outlet, myself, to reference and say, hey, I need to get onto Zoom. Show me how. I've helped over 25 residents here at Vida participate on Zoom. And some of them it's taken like 5 minutes, and some of them it's taken 3 days to get all their technologies up to date. But, Maureen did it. So we're just really excited about that. But I just wanted to point out, we know that there's a digital divide, but I think it boils down to something even deeper, which is that personal preference and that drive within people.
Well, I want to start out with a shout out to Maureen because I appreciate her tenacity, the fact that she stuck with it for 3 days. Maureen, we are all with you in this battle. Everyone is facing different sorts of technology questions, regardless of age, regardless of level. So thank you for your tenacity, and you are part of all of us. So we're all with you. So thank you for your extra efforts and for telling that story, Amy. I'm an optimist, just as my personality, and I want to look at some of the positive ideas and solutions that are coming out of this. Ben, I want to start with you. When you're looking at some of the ways to address the digital divide, to address these inequities, what are you seeing in your area that might be becoming a solution?
Yeah, and thank you for that question. I, like you, am an optimist, and the kinds of things that I see are making a difference. As I mentioned earlier, just kind of the acceleration and norming of technology in our lives. Older adults, technology services that is really, Senior Planet Colorado, initiatives like that, where you engage older folks in terms of use of technology. I see all types of innovations coming along that have real utility and value in our lives to keep us engaged. I think the infrastructure challenges that we've had in terms of reaching rural communities, for example, those are being reduced with a number of different innovations in terms of the delivery of broadband service, be they by satellites, be they by balloons. So real innovative ideas. And one important thing too is I'd like to mention is the initiative Changing the Narrative that our friends at Rose Community Foundation sort of co-funded with us. And that is kind of norming the whole concept of aging and how we engage older folks across the spectrum in terms of volunteer services, but also in the workforce, the compensated workforce.
Well,
digital technologies are enabling us to do much more of that.
Well, speaking of Rose Community Foundation, let's go to Janet. Janet, as a community foundation, part of its mission, I would imagine, is investing in our future, investing in ideas and innovations. What are you seeing as positive ideas, solutions, at least ways to move forward in a positive way? Let's go to you.
Yeah. So I think that for me, there have been sometimes very simple but interesting solutions around technology that have been heartening. We have had school districts that have, trying to figure out Wi-Fi connectivity issues and realize that they could use their buses to be able to put Wi-Fi and drive it to a location where, more families that were, in a mobile home park could access. So I think I've seen creativity from education and education leaders. A couple of other things that I would mention is that at least, and I know there are folks on here who are much, much better experts than myself, but my understanding, at least from the policy perspective about the telehealth innovations is there weren't a lot that a lot of the work that's happening now was actually, it wasn't a policy barrier that some of the innovations around telehealth could happen, they just weren't happening. And so now they are, and people are really benefiting from it. And so I think that's exciting to think about that there may be some policies that we have to change sort of after the pandemic, but there also were hopefully not a lot of policy barriers and that existed before in order to actually get going with telehealth innovations. And then the last thing that I'll just say that has been one of my favorite, and again, it's sort of, I would say it's an innovation, but it's a tried and true method is sort of, and kudos to sort of PBS is that, educational TV works for kindergarten for 3-year-olds. And we know that from Mr. Rogers and Sesame Street. And so one of my favorite things that I've also seen happen that's been a benefit to the statewide opportunities is the programming that they're offering and really using technology to have the best teachers from across the state give lessons every morning that are on PBS. And so it's in many ways a simple technology in terms of a TV in a household, but being able to use Wi-Fi connectivity to be able to have access to these incredible teachers to benefit any child that has a TV in their house. And so that has been one of my favorite projects that has been supported that is also happening statewide.
Janet, thank you for that shout out. I couldn't help but agree. I know at PBS 12, we've been happy to help provide that service for children of all ages, but being that educational source for 40 years now. But thank you for that shout out. I want to continue the conversation when it comes to positive innovations about health. John, let's go to you. In the work you're seeing, what are some of the ways that you're able to have some hope in this situation? There's always going to be difficulties and hurdles, but where are you seeing some inspiration?
Well, there's massive opportunity, I think, right now. And there's sort of 3 formats whereby you look at it. It's the funding, which has really opened things up. It's the format of opportunities to deliver care. And then it's the collaborative nature of care. And I'll just touch on each very quickly. Number one is the funding, the fact that care could actually be delivered and funded via phone or live video, or via remote monitoring of things like your blood pressure. First of all, that opened up opportunities. The number of services that are provided also as part of the pandemic opened up opportunity to the point where we went from $3 billion of activity and funding in telehealth towards a potential, the one report from McKinsey said we may go up to $250 billion market value of services and opportunities. So the opportunities are huge. The question is, how do we actually help people and bridge the divide? And I think there are a couple areas that I like a lot. Number one is, one thing that's actually not covered as well as it could be is this notion of the e-visit. 15 years ago, I was involved with a company called Relay Health, And a big part of it was, instead of having to be live video, the notion that you could theoretically have a back and forth email dialogue for a number of healthcare things and have that be paid for and covered for the working poor. It's an incredible value of not having to actually stop your hourly wage work, and it's an ability to, if you're an older adult, write down your thoughts and be clear instead of having sort of a camera freeze moment. And so things like the e-visit, I think, are great format adjustments. And then the last thing, I think this is the best, is if you can access care from your home and on your own time and schedule, that notion that your doctor needs to work with you to understand what's going on and might need to collaborate with you really creates an opportunity for care to be delivered in a way which is much more focused on the person. And so, between the funding, between the changes in formats, and then that notion of collaborative care, I see a lot of hope in this area, especially if the funding continues.
Well, Amanda and James, I want to get some quick takes from both of you. Amanda, I'm going to start with you. As you're looking at the kind of the positive side here, where we can see some development, see some innovation, what are you seeing on your side of things?
Yeah, there's some great things that we have the opportunity to do, and there's some great things that we're actually already doing. So, the first opportunity is that Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act only requires 4 counties in Colorado to translate ballots into a language other than English. That means we've got about 86,000 eligible voters who maybe aren't able to read their ballot because of language access issues. And that's pretty concerning during a time of social distancing, right? Because before, maybe you go into a vote center to get help, or you might take your ballot with you to your Bible study, or you might have your cousin come over and help you understand it. And we might not be able to do that during social distancing. So one opportunity for the Secretary of State is to use some of the CARES funding that's recently come in to ensure that we have translated sample ballots so that all voters, regardless of language access, can vote independently at home. One of the things that we've already done, it's actually a bill that we passed last year, is that voters who have visual impairments, so if you have trouble reading that paper ballot that gets mailed to you, maybe you normally would have gone into a vote center and voted on a machine there that was a little more accessible. Now, if you have assistive technology at home that can help you read, fine print on paper, you can contact your county clerk and they can actually get you a ballot that your assistive technology can read so that you can vote independently from home. So if folks have concerns about COVID and social distancing, they should definitely utilize that program. And then the last thing that I think, all of us can do is fill out our census. That's the way that we ensure that Colorado gets its fair share of federal resources for things like healthcare or Head Start, a number of programs. It's about $2,000 per person that fills it out, that it's money that comes into the state. And so I think that's one of the ways that we can ensure that our communities get the resources that they need.
Well, James, as we wrap up this question, let me get your quick take on some of the positive innovations you're seeing address these issues from your end of things.
Yeah. So what we do is a framework called collective impact. However, Park Hill Collective Impact is a hybrid version of it that's very different than what I've seen around the country. We have taken the best practices of community organizing and collective impact and really combined those together to build community voice and power as we do our work. So everything that we do starts with that community voice, understanding what the issues are, building and fortifying that voice with data, and talking with our community partners and the community to create the advocacy solution or change that we'd like to see going into that. The way that's worked out as of late, actually, I have a meeting this afternoon that is going to be about supporting children in remote learning and the fall semester, as we really are pretty uncertain on how that's going to be. Being able to really hear what we've heard from the community. Now I'm going to be able to talk to over 20 school leaders, nonprofit leaders, and experts in the field to really think about what data we can pair with the community voice to fortify that and to come up with a plan for how to support children in child development in the summer and fall with the uncertainty that the pandemic has brought us. So yeah, we're pretty excited about that, and I think this is the type of stuff that keeps me motivated and going at hard times like this.
Well, I've often said when we do things in our studio, or whether it's our Zoom studio, how fast an hour goes by, and it certainly has gone by quickly here. I want to give everybody a chance to give us a very quick take, just a little under 30 seconds for everybody, about a prediction, where we're going from here, positive, negative, anywhere in between, but your prediction of as we head towards the future using technology. Everybody, just a little under 30 seconds. Katrina, Chief, and I'm going to start with you. Your quick prediction of where we go from here.
Well, I think everybody is more receptive to using technology, and the future is just going to, in the future, it's just going to allow us to connect with more people and connect in different ways than we might have thought possible.
John, let's go to you. John Emerson, your crystal ball moment. What can you see in the future?
I'm going to borrow something from someone else that said, every company right now during COVID is really a digital health company in some ways, because you need to keep your workers safe. You need to make sure that they're tested, that you have PPE, that you have process. And so in many ways, I think we're all have become digital health companies. That's my number one big impact. I would also say that with Medicaid rolls doubling, there's going to be a big shift in terms of how care and trying to make sure people have access in a way that leverages technology but provides equal access for all.
Amanda Gonzalez, let's go to you for your quick prediction.
I'll echo better access for everyone. I think we've seen that we're all going to be able to understand what's going on in our communities in hopefully better and friendlier ways.
Janet Lopez, as you look ahead, what do you see?
My prediction is just that that I think that we need to remind people, and as we think about in the education system, that blended and virtual solutions, as we think about hybrid models for schools in the fall, are only going to be as good as the sort of relationships that are developed with students. And so we can never sort of forget that as great as all the technology is, the human element that young people need as they're learning.
Ben Moultrie, we're looking to you. What do you see ahead?
I see a just a much broader examination around the question of equity as it impacts our lives, not only in terms of justice, but in terms of sort of access to healthcare, technology, education, workforce opportunities. And so, again, I'm really quite optimistic about that examination.
Stella Nash, give us your quick take of what you think is ahead for all of us.
There will be more access. There will be more affordability. And I think that rural Colorado, all 64 counties, which 54 of them are rural, will be connected to Senior Planet.
I would love to see that. I love that kind of positivity in your prediction. James Roy II, let's go to you. Your prediction is we're going ahead.
Yeah, I see this as a bridge to greater compassion, understanding, and empathy. Those that have resisted technology or have been forced to become more comfortable with it. Those that have been more reliant on technology have grown to miss the human connection. And so the wisdom of older generations will now be able to be connected in better ways. And when the pandemic is over and the technology can start to take a step back, those human connections are going to become more and more powerful than ever, especially because of the bridge that these times have created for that compassion.
Shreya Sriram, let's go to you. You've done a lot of bridging yourself. What do you see looking forward?
Definitely. I'm definitely optimistic about intergenerational possibilities between the young and old generations. I'm optimistic that they can grow. Like you said, Dominic, previously, that Zoom has now really become a verb, right? So all these online communication and video communication tools are being used very much more frequently, and this can benefit us as an organization to really connect with our senior citizen clients much better, right? That digital gap, that digital wall has really been knocked down now. So I think we can really look forward to the future in terms of the communication and connections that are to come.
Amy Zavala, you're our last person to check out the crystal ball. What do you see ahead?
I feel that technology is going to be viewed more as a friend instead of a foe. I've seen confidences being boosted, that people can remain connected in this time. I feel like the perception that people have gotten of themselves, if they first believe that they can do it and then they do it, it's just going through the roof. And I have seen that mindset shift among older people here at Vita. So it was great.
Well, it's great to see. And I just want to thank all of our wonderful panel for joining us today. It's been a fantastic conversation here on The Same Page. If you'd like to watch this show online, please check it out at pbs12.org, or please check out our next discussion on Friday, June 26th at 7 p.m. right here on PBS 12. If you'd like to join the conversation with your own question or comment, please feel free to call 303-991-5027 or go to changingthenarrativeco.org. For everyone here at On the Same Page, I'm Dominic Gazzuti. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.